to episode number 123 of the Cheesesteaks and Controllers podcast, presented by Fox PHO The Gambler, 102.5 FM, 1480 AM, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcasts. This is Jason Finelli, the video game expert at Fox PHO The Gambler. Have an excellent show for you today. Lucky number 123 for yours truly. Birthday is January 23rd, was this past Monday. Was at Raw is 30 down at the Wells Fargo Center. Had a blast watching some legendary wrestlers mix it up with current wrestlers. Always love doing that. But tonight we are going to talk about and focus on a major surprise that happened this week, and that is the addition of Goldeneye 007 to Xbox Game Pass and Nintendo Switch Online if you have the expansion pack. It was confirmed back in September that it would be coming in 2023. I'm not sure if it was announced to be this early, but it is here. I just finished playing it on Thursday night, played through the first level, damn, as I remembered it back on the Nintendo 64. And to celebrate the game, I have reached out to a friend that I made a couple years ago at E3. And he agreed to come on the show to talk about his experience making the game. That's right. Specifically, the music for the game, the very notable soundtrack to GoldenEye 007, composed in part, in half, I guess, by one Grant Kirkhope. And Grant joins me here on the first segment of the episode, I should say, to talk about making that GoldenEye soundtrack back in the day, other soundtracks that he's made, including Banjo-Kazooie and Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning a little more recently. And then the second segment, I'm going to give my tips on playing GoldenEye to all those young kids that might not have done it before, or even to the old heads who might have been playing shooters long after that and forgot how GoldenEye works. So I picked up a couple of things just from that first level that I will share at the end of this, and then we will wrap things up with a Royal Rumble themed segment. I went through and I looked at some of the most prominent video game characters available, and I wondered who would be the best suited, just based on their skill set, for something like a Royal Rumble match. If they were a professional wrestler, how would they fare in the Royal Rumble? Now, I'm not going to do all pro wrestlers because that would be unfair. Zangief from Street Fighter, Mike Hagar from Final Fight, King from Tekken, so on and so forth. Plus, I've done that before. Pre-WrestleMania, I talked about the best video game wrestlers, wrestling characters. So this one, I'm going to take video game characters and apply their skills to a Royal Rumble match and the strategy within, and think about who would fare the best. But let's not waste any more time. Our first segment of Cheesesteaks and Controllers, episode number 123, is one that's very special to me. I had the opportunity to meet this fellow at E3 2019, I want to say, at a backyard party. Did not know who he was, sat at a table, had this great conversation, and then he said his name, and I about fell out of my chair. If you have been playing video games as long as I have, you know this man's name from his music: Banjo-Kazooie, Perfect Dark, Viva Pinata, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, and most importantly, GoldenEye 007 on Nintendo 64, which is coming back today, the same day this podcast drops. And with me to talk about that music is the one and only Grant Kirkhope. Grant, how the hell are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for that awesome introduction.
Yes,
it makes me sound a lot better than I really am.
So we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. It's interesting how not only is this whole soundtrack coming back, but one song in particular has blown up on TikTok and become its own little meme. That's the watch pause music. Of all the songs you could have thought of that would become a huge inside internet joke, was that the one?
No, well, you never know, do you? Like, these things just have a life of their own, don't they? It's such a bizarre thing. And I mean, it's something that took 20 minutes to write, literally, thinking, I just need a pause tune, something that can play when players have paused the game. You don't think it's going to be important. You think the songs in the game are going to be important, the level tunes and all the rest of it,
Sure.
And it's so funny how these guys who've done the videos on TikTok, which I think are really funny and hilarious, and it's got a life of its own now. I mean, you can never predict these things. It just comes out the blue,
That's true. And I think if I'm thinking of the one TikTok where the guy's like, "Yeah, we just need a pause track. It's a licensed game. You don't really need a lot." And they just like, "How about this?" Bang, and they start dancing for a minute. That's been shared, I think, 4 or 5 times ever since yesterday when
Right.
Wednesday, excuse me, when Goldeneye was announced to be coming this week. So what would you say is the feeling going into maybe a whole new generation experiencing this music for the first time as it was intended? Obviously, you can listen to soundtracks on YouTube or wherever else, but now these kids are going to be able to play this game in its original source. How does that make you feel?
Well, it's always nice for people to, play games that I've written music for. It's super cool that people take the time to listen to it. I mean, it's an old game. I wonder how they're going to accept it or look at it. Or, I think sometimes like games like Banjo-Kazooie, it doesn't matter that they look a little bit old because it's kind of it's not a real thing. But when you get first person shooters like these days, they're really realistic, So
Yeah.
a game like GoldenEye was trying to be realistic at the time, but it's like 20 odd years ago. So are people going to look at it and think it looks a bit dated, or are they going to enjoy playing it? Because I guess the frame rate will be better because the machine can handle it better as opposed to back in the day it couldn't quite handle it. So all that stuff's going to be interesting. You wonder, has it got a life, for going forward from now, or is it just one of those things people are going to go, it's a bit old and it's no point playing it? And maybe the guys that played it originally, like us, might get a kick out of playing it again, but I don't know whether these things are impossible, right? People might play it and get it. I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like it is the best Bond game, right? It's regardless of all the ones that got made after it. I feel like they all maybe look better, but I feel like the GoldenEye was the one Bond game that kind of captured the kind of the Bondness, the kind of the sneaking around stuff and all the rest of it. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes.
I agree 100%. And I have to say, though, looking at the trailers that launched on Wednesday to announce this, when he's standing on the train and he fixes his sleeves, but his hands don't move, so it just looks like he's punching himself in the wrist. I'm like, how is this going to translate? But honestly, I was a bit unnerved, I guess the word is, by how smooth this gameplay looked. I remember 30 frames a second on the 64 back in 98 or 96 or 97, excuse me. And then all of a sudden this is going to be smooth 60 frames. So I'm wondering if there's an adjustment period for us as well. Not only for the speed of the game, but also maybe the control scheme as well. Have you had a chance to try this new? Have they given you that chance yet, or do you have to wait until Friday like everybody else?
No, they don't contact me about anything. So I've got no, I left the company in 2008, so there's no connection with me. I mean, I've had some dealings with them. We're getting the vinyls for the Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie and Perfect Dark release. So I've been doing stuff for them with Rare, about that. I mean, I write the sleeve notes and things like that. But like game wise, there's no need for them to contact me about anything. They completely own it, So, that is going to be a bit strange. And I wonder how it's going to feel. And I've got to say, I feel like it needs to be on an N64 controller. I think you need to have that. You've got to have that. Like the dual analog stick thing, I don't think it's going to.
I'm afraid. I am afraid that I'm going to be terrible
I feel like,
at this.
I feel like that's not going to work for me. I want the original N64 because I love that controller.
Yeah, you take for granted how great that controller was. And I think a lot of people, if anything, the sales of the 64 controller for Switch when the expansion kit hit and the 64 games came, they're going to skyrocket because people are going to want to play GoldenEye the way they did before.
Yeah. And I've never been very good at the dual analog stick thing. I've never been very good at that.
It takes some getting used to.
I know. I think I'm just too old. Just can't do it.
I don't know about that. But, let's get into going back into the making the music for this game. Obviously, if you're playing through it, a lot of the music uses the Bond theme that we all know and love as its like leitmotif. It's in all the different songs of the game. It's features throughout everywhere. Was that yours and Graham Norgate, the other co-composer's strategy going into this, or were you trying to make it sound as original as possible while still being Bond-like, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, no, I think we were amazed that we got the rights to use the tune because Monty Norman, who wrote it, is very litigious about that tune and very protective. And well, he just passed away, I think, last year, the year before. But I mean, you know, the fact that we had the rights to use it, we were like, oh my God, we can actually use the actual Bond theme. It was just so exciting to get to do that. So, yes, I mean, I was just thinking, how can I use this in as many different ways as possible? Like, it's everywhere. And you can't have a Bond game without that music. You just can't. You can't have anything Bond without that music. It's like, it's so, it's probably one of the best known melodies in the world, you know, like alongside, I don't know, other stuff, you know, I can't think of the tune, but I mean, it's such a iconic thing, and to get to use it, it was just brilliant. It was great fun for me, you know, to go through, you know, I had the at the time we had the double CD of all the pop tunes that preceded the movies, right? You know, like Shirley Bassey and all the classic stuff, you know. And I was just going through that, going, what can I steal? What can I steal? And add it into the Goldeneye soundtrack. You know, there's the frigate. You know, I've talked about this before, but it's got my Faith No More, We Care a Lot bass line.
Love that.
And then I put the Duran Duran Stabbed from View to a Kill sort of on top of that. It's a that kind of thing, right? And then my phone's ringing. And then just got my put the Bond tune over that, and it was just instantly brilliant. You know, to me, I thought it just fitted so well. So to get the chance to kind of go over that and use a Bond melody was just fantastic fun. And it was the first game I'd ever written music for, right? So I'd never done a game before apart from that. So to get that as your first game is ridiculous, and I had no idea what I was doing, you know.
So you hadn't produced you hadn't composed your own soundtrack before? This was your first ever one?
That was it, yeah, the first one.
Really? Had you contributed before, or had you worked in games before this, or Goldeneye was
No. I started Ren in October 95.
Interesting.
So, and the first thing I had to do was I had to convert Dave Wise's music from Diddy Kong's Quest on the SNES to work on the original Game Boy. So that was just a straight conversion. And then the first game I got to do was Goldeneye. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and they agreed because Graham Norgate was doing Goldeneye when I first he was there before me. So when I got there, I've been there about it was October, so maybe a couple of months, and Graham was getting really busy with he was still doing Ken Griffey baseball on the Super NES. And he was doing
great game.
Yeah, and he was doing Blast Court at the same time. And so he said, I'm really busy with those. Could you take over Goldeneye? And I was like, are you kidding? I'd love to do that, you know. So it was agreed that I did the Game Boy in the morning, and then I would do Goldeneye in the afternoon. And so, yeah.
And you're working with two such wildly different sets of, I guess, digital instruments. Were you like, how do you take your brain from going from Game Boy, where you're so limited, to 64, which at the time was cutting edge, able to experiment as much as you want? Like, was the break in the middle of the day, how you'd reset your brain? Like, how do you approach both those projects at once?
Well, I guess it's just you have your lunch right and then start again, don't you? It's doing something else, you know. It's a bit like that. I mean, you know, and I was so excited to get to do, because I didn't think I'd get to be in an N64 game for quite a while. I thought I'd have to wait probably a year before they trusted me, you know.
Sure.
But it was super quick, so, you know, I couldn't believe my luck. And, you know, Graham showed me how the N64 worked. I have to get sounds into it, and, you know, it's quite a complex, you know, thing how you get the sounds in the first place. He showed me how to resample things to like a way lower sample rate, so it sounds nowhere near CD quality. You know, it's right down the bottom of the depths, you know. To me, it's amazing that it even sounds as good as it does, considering how we had to, you know, really edit those sounds to get the tiniest footprint, you know, in the memory, and it still sounds all right. I mean, I can't believe people like to listen to it, really, because it's, you know, it's the qualities, the actual sonic qualities, like pretty substandard, really, you know, just because we didn't have the space to get the samples in there, you know, crazy.
Yeah. So I'm curious too, how creating music for that day and age compares to something like now. Do you prefer having, obviously, more modern music? You have access to more tools, but do you miss the whole, like, maybe simplicity of the 64? Was it simple? Like, where do we stand as far as 64 composing music for it in comparison to now? Like, I think of Amalur, which is one of my favorite soundtracks of the last couple generations. I think I'm the only one who champions that game on a daily basis. But hearing that soundtrack and its majesty and comparing it to the work that you had done in the 64 era, do you miss that era, or do you prefer now?
I think it's a double-edged sword, really. I feel like, you know, when you're working on something that's restrictive like the N64, it does it does make you think. I don't like this phrase, but it makes you think outside the box. You have to be more creative. And like sometimes when you've got a really finite palette of instruments, you've only got so many instruments you can get in there because it's so small.
Right.
That you have to find new ways to use them super low down so that it sounds strange, or super high up. So, like things that you wouldn't expect to do. And it makes you kind of be, I guess, a bit more creative. But equally, these days, when you've got these great, huge sample libraries of orchestras that you can make it sound, really real. Like sometimes people don't even know, like on Mario Rabbids, the first Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle game, not all of that is live orchestra. Some of that is my samples. It's not live orchestra. Some of it is, and people can't really tell. So that's crazy that it can be like that. And also, like, equally, you can put your finger on one note on a synthesizer these days, and it sounds incredible. It's got this huge, great swathe of sound, and it's incredible. So, you couldn't do that back then. You just had to, you couldn't do anything like that. So I feel like it's nice to have all the luxury of today's fantastic sounds, but you end up going, I need to find a bass sound. You've got 5,000 synthesizer presets to go through, which drives you crazy. Where back in the N64 days, you had like 2 bass sounds, and that was it.
Yeah,
you put in 2 sounds that you liked, and you had to use one or the other, and that was it. And so, both things are good for different reasons.
It's an embarrassment of riches now, but sometimes
it is.
Simplicity. I get that. I do get that. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about Banjo-Kazooie, which also saw a resurgence. In fact, the day after, or 2 days after we met each other for the first time, Nintendo dropped Banjo and Smash Brothers, and I immediately asked you, how did you keep that secret? And your answer, I think, was, I don't know.
That was hard. I mean, even like not telling my kids, that was hard.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That is everybody. Ooh, boy.
Crazy. I mean, that was such a, it's such a, I'm so flattered that they asked me to do a tune in the first place.
Sure.
But that people have been wanting Banjo for so many years, and I thought it would never happen. And then when they said, and then I found out it was going to happen, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be, people are going to go nuts, and like all those fan reactions that you can see on YouTube, people crying and all that.
They're
like
the best.
I know it gives me chills just talking about it now, because like I was the same way, and watching these guys. Like my friend Gerard, clearly the completionist, who was in tears, I'm watching the guys at the Nintendo store go ballistic when that's one of those moments, I think, that, I'll never forget that as long as I live. That's one of those special life moments where people went absolutely crazy. It was just fantastic.
I remember how it made me feel, and you created it, so I can't imagine the increase of excitement and pure adulation that you were feeling. And the fact that you were able to keep that secret, I think, is a Herculean effort, to be completely honest with you. So when we go from Goldeneye to Banjo, your first project, to your second project, or was there anything in between there?
Yeah, well, I did. So I did Dream at the start, because Dream turned into Banjo, right?
Okay.
And it was originally me and Dave Wise were doing Dream together. And then when Banjo started, I did that, and Dave went off to do Diddy Kong Racing, so it went like that.
Cool.
So Banjo-Kazooie was the first game I did everything on, all the music and all the sound effects.
Right. So this is also then the first game you ever did original music for. Granted, you did Goldeneye original music, but you had that source material. This was just you. Was that, how much more intimidating was that to get right? Because this is like the first time you were able to put all of your creativity from the first note to the last note into this soundtrack.
That was it was a bit scary, I suppose, because it was kind of the time where they're like, well, now, I mean, they trust me now, so I need to make sure they do a good job, and also, we were trying to beat Mario, that was what we're trying to do. I mean, I'm not saying we did that, but that was our goal.
Hard to do, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, so I thought that there's no point in me trying to write that kind of poppy jazz that Koji Kondo does, because he's fantastic at that, and I'm terrible at that, so it's just going to sound awful. So I thought I need to find something maybe that's going to give the game a signature sound. And you don't really know if you succeeded until people play it, because you might think the sound's right, but everyone else might hate it,
Sure.
So it was one of those things where I just did my best, and also back in those days, you had to wait a month for the mags to review it and come out right. So there was no instant access to the internet where you get the review the minute it was released. You had to wait for the magazine, wait for the magazine to come out. N64 magazine, whatever, would come out a month later, and then they'd review it in there, and you wouldn't know until whether they liked it or not. So it's such a different time, and I think that the fact that I can't believe that my soundtracks from back in the day, people are still playing them now. I still find that, I thought it might last 6 months if you're lucky, never mind 20 odd years. You wouldn't think anybody would care about that stuff back in the day. So it's super flattering that people even bother to listen to it these days.
Yeah, and I got to admit, it's transcending generations. When I mentioned to my 6-year-old daughter, I picked her up and I said I was talking to you, the guy who wrote the banjo music. She said, "Can we listen to Spiral Mountain on the way home?" So we listened to Spiral Mountain on the way home. That was the Smash Brothers was her first introduction to banjo, but we have since played banjo. We've played the XBLA version, so that the music is not only been listening to the people who first heard it, but now the current generation is listening to it, and I expect that to keep going throughout the ages because it's just so good.
I really feel banjo holds up these days. I think it does.
For sure.
And and I also think like what I like about little kids is that I mean I've got a couple of kids, they're older now, but when they're little, I kind of feel like kids don't really care what's cool.
Nope.
They either like it or they don't. You know what I mean? It's like that. And so I always feel that if little kids can still like it and they enjoy it, then we must have done something right back in those days. It must be something that we did as a team together that got into that game that makes kids can still get with it now and associate with it and have really good fun with it. And that's, for me, that's kind of the purest form of video gaming in some respects, because they've got no ideals. They've got don't care what's cool. Do you like it? No. Would you like it? Yes. And that's it. And I love that kind of purity. It's really nice,
I agree 100%. And that's why I love watching her reactions when we're playing games for the
first time. Yeah, I
bet. Very, really cool. So 2 more questions for you before I get you out here. Similar questions. First of all, back to the GoldenEye soundtrack. Obviously comes out today on Xbox and Nintendo Switch. Do you have a favorite song from that album? The one where you thought, man, I really had it going that day when I wrote that one.
I don't know if I thought I had it going any day really, but I think, but I think there's one in the control center. Thing is, when I wrote the music, right, we called it like level 1, level 2, and so the titles get added later. So I still get a bit confused as to which is which. Mm-hmm. There's one that goes ducky ducky down. Is it 7 Eye or something, or the control room or something? Maybe facility. It might be that. Yeah.
As soon as you made that sound, my head went straight to, oh man, I think it's facility.
Yeah, you got to escape out the cell, haven't you? And all the guards are all that. Yeah, so not the cell. I remember. Yeah, you got to be quiet in that level.
Yeah, I gotta know. I gotta find this now.
But it's like duggy duggy da. Does that sound?
Yeah. Duggy duggy da. Satellite bunker maybe.
Yeah, something like that. I think that's my favorite. I like that one a lot.
Oh, okay.
But also, I've got to say, Statue Park that's one of my favorites.
I like that one too.
Because I was trying to get that kind of John Barry, the intro chorus to that in the brass. It's really John Barry, the Bond kind of sound, So I was going for that kind of classic John Barry sound. So I do like that one as well. It's quite grand for that area, all the statues there, So
I mean, it's hard to pick a loser. They're all fantastic, but those 2 are good. And then finally, is there a soundtrack in your portfolio that when people obviously, when they talk about your line of work, they mention GoldenEye, Banjo, more current or more recent games like Mario and Rabbids, your work in Smash Brothers. Is there one soundtrack that you think is in your background that's underrated, like one that you think back of fondly, but doesn't get mentioned as much as the other games that you worked on?
Like I said, Amalur is quite one of those. I mean, when I did that Kings of Amalur, it's like one of those things that, it was time for me to kind of prove to myself that I could write for like gigantic orchestra. I'd never done that before. Not that. I mean, I've done a bit in Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, but not as big as that, So I was trying to prove to myself that I really could write something of that stature, that kind of size. So the first boss piece I wrote for that was a Baylor. Baylor was the first boss piece that I did. Yep. And so that's how I really tried to prove to myself that I could do it. I thought I can either do it or I can't. And I took maybe a week over it to write that tune. And I was super happy with the results. I thought to myself, I thought I'd done a good job, and I think I can handle that kind of big orchestra stuff, So, maybe Amalur, but that game's probably sold 3 or 4 million, probably more by now. It's done an awful lot. It's done a lot of copies. People, I think at the time it was just a bit of a slow burner, but over the years people have gone back to it, and it's sold a lot. I'm sure it sold a lot of copies for a year.
And then they re-released it.
After
8 years, added that extra chapter, which leads right into a sequel. So if you're watching THQ Nordic, let's get on that, shall we? But
so I did the music for the DLC as well for the deal.
For the
extra.
Awesome. Yeah. Oh, so good. So that's all I had for you. I very much appreciate your time coming on here talking to me. GoldenEye 007 out today on Xbox Game Pass or Xbox Digital Store. Nintendo Switch, if you have the expansion pack of the online, you can get it on there for the 64 version. Grant, thank you so much for joining me. Can't wait to hear what's next in your portfolio, and I hope we'll be talking again, whatever that is, very soon. Thanks, Grant.
Anytime, sir. Anytime at all.
Coming up next, a few tips and reminders for those who haven't played Goldeneye in a long time. There is going to be a bit of a adjustment, and I want to make sure that you get through that when you're playing the game once again for the first time. Stick around. All right, welcome back to Cheesesteaks and Controllers, episode number 123. A major thank you to Grant Kirkhope, esteemed video game composer, for joining me today to talk about Goldeneye and other things in his library and repertoire. Very interested to see what comes next from him. He's obviously very good at keeping secrets, as we mentioned, so I wonder what is next in the pipeline for Mr. Kirkhope. I'm hoping it's an Amalur sequel, but we will see later on in the year, perhaps. But moving on now to our second segment. I can talk tonight. Second segment of the show. Let's talk about GoldenEye 007, shall we? It is a game that first released back in 1997 when I was the ripe age of 10, and now it is back on both Nintendo Switch Online and on Xbox Game Pass. You're going to want to jump in if you have either of those things. If you're an older fella like me and you played it back in the day, you're going to want to jump in. If you're new to the game, you're going to want to jump in and see what all the hype is about. And I get that, but there are some things you're going to need to know before you do that. The game is not completely modernized. It is not what it seems, and I'm going to walk you through what I'm talking about right now. So first and foremost, when you pick up the controller and you play the game, now I played this on Xbox Game Pass. I specifically played it with my normal Xbox controller. So when I'm holding the controller in my hand and I'm playing the game, the first thing I notice is when I press the left trigger to aim, all it does is add a little reticle to the screen. I don't then move with the right stick to aim just the gun. I have not figured out how to do that. I'm guessing it's on the D-pad, but I didn't try it there. So that's the first major adjustment. When you press left to aim, it's not going to go to where the gun becomes center with the screen like Call of Duty games do. It's not going to be one of those things where it, gives you just movement of the gun like it did in the old day. You'd press I think it was left shoulder on the 64 controller, and then only the gun would move in your vision, and James Bond would stay perfectly still. Here, I think it just puts the reticle on the screen, and your body still moves, but the gun is always aiming in the center of the screen. So it makes it a little more like a red dot sort of aim, center of the screen. Keep that if you hold the button down. I didn't find it very useful. I thought that was a little wonky, honestly. So that might take some adjustment. And it leads into my second point. When you're using the silenced PP7 in the first level, other pistols in the later portions of the game, or even the rifles, honestly, the KF-7 Soviet that you pick up from the first enemy in the dam, where it applies to as well. Rely on the hip fire. That is not something I normally say for shooters these days, whether it's Fortnite third person or first person like Call of Duty. I tend to recommend aiming down the sights or, pressing the button to aim and shoot. Here, firing from the hip is encouraged, if not, stressed. I found myself much more accurate with the pistol, specifically the silenced pistol on the first mission. I found that to be a lot more accurate when just shooting from the hip than when trying to aim with that button down, what I was just mentioning in the previous tip, which makes sense. At the time, aiming down sights was not, shooters in general on consoles were not exactly new. We're not exactly established. I don't know that there were many first-person shooters at all before GoldenEye on a console. So this might have been one of the first, if not the first. So they were still trying to figure out the best control scheme. It's not a control scheme, not scream. What is this, a horror movie? it's not the modernized and tested and, you know, tried and true control scheme of now. Apparently there is a way to finagle it, but it takes some real thought and engineering. If you just want to play the game the way it is, it's going to take some getting used to. You're going to have to transport yourself back 25, 26 years ago to how the development thought was for a first-person shooter, and that is a lot of emphasis on the hip fire. There are guns that are better when you aim. The sniper rifle you'll receive in the Dam is a good example of that. But based on the control scheme that's given to you, remember the hip fire. That's my only real tip here. Remember the hip fire. Don't think you're going to aim down the sights with every enemy if that's what you're used to. You're going to have to get out of that when you're playing Goldeneye, just because of how retro it is. And it is retro. It is a retro shooter, 100%, no question about it. It's fun. It's still very fun, but there are moments in this port, at least in that first little bit, where it's showing its age. And that actually leads to tip number 3 that I have for you. When you're opening a door, do not think you're going to press X or B, the side buttons on the face of the controller, like I was trying to do. I am programmed to think that when I'm holding the controller, my thumb needs to hover in the middle of the X, Y, A, B button scheme in order to open the door. No, here you're pressing A. It feels very unnatural, yes, but it's the way things were done then. You press the big green button to open the door. That's how it worked on the Nintendo 64 controller. It's how it's going to work on the Xbox controller or the Pro controller or the Joy-Cons, whatever it is you're playing with. A button is going to open and close those doors. It's going to activate switches. It's going to act as your main action button. That took some getting used to. I think a full 30 seconds was added to my mission time in that first mission, just because I kept forgetting to press the A button to open the door. So at multiple doors or multiple switches, like the security gates for the truck, which you'll see in that first mission, I would just forget, and I would push and nothing would happen. And I would push a different button and nothing would happen. Then I would remember, oh, right, it's A. Activate with A. Off we go. Fourth, when you're playing through this mission, and the Dam mission is a perfect example of this. So if you try to play at a more advanced level, if you're trying to play a 00 agent, for example, you'll see that there's one of your missions is to install a covert modem on the satellite array or something like that. You'll note when you're going through your guns, as you collect more guns throughout the stage, that the covert modem does not appear in your selectable inventory. They purposely hid it, and you have to go into the pause menu with the watch to find it. And they did that because they didn't want people accidentally cycling and finding it and then launching it by accident. And the reason they took that ability away is because you get one. This is very much a 1997 thought process game in terms of difficulty. 00 Agent is the most difficult on purpose. This is an extra mission just for the higher levels, if not exclusively for 00 Agent. You're going to get one of those modems, and if you don't put it in the right spot, you're screwed. It will say installation not or modem not installed correctly. You will get objective B failed, and then you'll have to start the mission all over again. It is a very retro way of doing things, but they weren't going to take that fail out of the mission structure. Technically, they expect you to play the stage on Agent and Secret Agent before even trying 00 Agent, and I imagine, if I remember correctly, that they introduce the one and done, do it right or fail sort of motif in other missions, but at lower difficulty levels. So they don't expect you to jump right into 00 Agent. I forgot this was a thing. and I threw it at a computer instead of a satellite dish, and it told me I failed, and I had to run through the whole stage again. Doesn't help that this part of the mission is one of the last things you do before you escape. Made it a little more frustrating, but there it was. What am I going to do? So just remember that if there's an item it's supposed to be in your inventory, and you cycle through your guns and you don't have it, it's in that pause menu, and it's the only place to get it. That is created as a fail-safe for you, so you don't accidentally shoot it or activate it in your inventory when you're not supposed to. But remember that you only get one chance to put it where it belongs, and if you don't, then you're screwed. So just make sure that you're focused on that. This is a 1997 way of development. It will not be forgiving in certain places. It will not give you any courtesies. Play knowing that, and you will be fine, I think. And finally, remember to have fun. Remember to have some retro-inspired fun. There are going to be some growing pains in this. It is not a perfect translation to the modern way that we do things now. There is some jank, some 26-year-old jank from this 1997 game. And as long as you keep that in mind while you're playing it, I think you're going to have a blast. It is still fun. I had to do the level twice, but I still had a blast doing it. I can't wait to dive into more. The multiplayer, if you can get some friends together, is some of the best you'll ever play. It's awesome. It's awesome that it's back. It's awesome that we get to play it. And it's awesome that they finally figured this out. Now, would I have rathered the rumored Xbox Live remaster that leaked on the internet and has its own speedrun scene and stuff like that? Yeah, sure. There are some technical improvements there that aren't here. There are some changes to the way that the game runs that don't quite translate to this more rigid port. But at the end of the day, I can now turn on my Xbox or my Switch and play Goldeneye like I'm 10 years old again. And that's hard to really dissuade me from playing. It plays well enough. It is the port of the game that I remember as a kid, and that's really all I needed to be. So if you're going to check that out, if you have Xbox Game Pass, or if you have Nintendo Switch Online with Expansion Pass, or if you just want to spend the money, I'm not sure exactly how much it is. It's a short download, only 510 megs, and you're in, and you're playing GoldenEye just like we did in the glory days of the late 90s. And I hope you have a blast with it. Just keep these things in mind that I mentioned while you play, whether you're new or whether you've played it before and forgot about it. Either way, there's going to be some things that bite you in the butt. Just make sure that you're paying attention, and you will love GoldenEye 007. Coming up after the break, now that GoldenEye has broken free of the red tape and come back to consoles, we're going to look at 5 other games that are also bogged down by admin or tech or what have you, and talk about why those games might not be so lucky. Stick around. All right, welcome back to Cheesesteaks and Controllers, episode number 123. A big thank you once again to Grant Kirkhope, longtime video game composer, storied video game composer, talking to us about GoldenEye and Banjo and other things that have come out. Second segment was all about tips getting into GoldenEye 007 for the first time in 26 years, or the first time ever, depending on who you are. There are some things, some learning curves, some retro-related jank that you're going to have to know about if you jump into this game. I recommend that you do, whether you're on Switch or you're on Xbox Game Pass, but you should check it out regardless. Now, we're going to take that and we're going to segue it into our third segment of the show, and that is other games that find themselves in the same licensing hole that GoldenEye was once in. Now, what I mean by that is we're going to talk about games that, have a lot of red tape, have a lot of things getting in the way of a proper remaster or remake or what have you. Games that have been highly requested by fans, games that have just fallen into the ether, stuff like that. there is a nice list of games that some of you might not even remember that are, cast to the annals of history simply because of clerical mishaps or lost source code in some situations. So we're going to explore 5 different examples of games that are unable to be resurrected, or at least most likely unable. I never want to say never. Goldeneye did come out after all. In the modern era. The first one is a licensed game, which the fact that I'm talking about a licensed game being better than the source material, other than the other way around, is very interesting. But that is a topic for another day. Instead, we're going to talk about X-Men Origins Wolverine, the first solo Wolverine film, the first movie to come out with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine in 2007, I want to say, 2006, 2007, came with it, or had with it, a third-person action game where you played as Wolverine, basically going through the story of the movie. It was developed by published by Activision, and it had a lot of interesting Easter eggs referring to other Activision products and other things, other pop culture references. For example, the sword of the Lich King is hidden in X-Men Origins somewhere. A nice little Easter egg like that. But because of Activision being the publisher at the time, it's probably not going to see the light of day again, because Marvel, obviously, is now living in the House of Mouse over at Disney. So anything that was not properly licensed by, Marvel or Disney or anything like that is probably not going to see the light of day again, which is a shame, because the game is, especially for a licensed game, very good. The only way you're going to find it is if you find a physical copy somehow. I believe it was Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, PC, maybe the Wii, although obviously the PS3 or 360 versions would be better. As far as I remember, they'd be better than the Wii version. But that is one that will sadly probably never see the light of day. And another one, which is actually a little more sad for me, because I love this game. I love it so much. And that is Metal Gear Solid 4. The PlayStation 3 was notoriously difficult to develop for anyway. A lot of hurdles in the cell processor technology that they used. A lot of issues were had with the console at the time. And because of that, a lot of PS3 exclusives that they might want to port to newer systems run into a lot of roadblocks. And nowhere is that more apparent than Metal Gear Solid 4, because it was so... The things that you did in that game were so closely tied to what the console could do. Separating it from that is nearly impossible and could potentially break the game. And what is the point of porting a game if it's just going to be broken on the new systems? It's not worth it. It's a shame, too, because for all of the criticisms that MGS4 gets from people who, in my opinion, don't know what they're talking about, but hey-ho, they call it, a interactive movie because there's not a lot of action. There's a lot of cutscenes and stuff like that. But when you're culminating a franchise like Metal Gear, it's going to require exposition, because the whole franchise required exposition. Would I have liked some more gameplay? Sure, but I thought the balance was fine. I didn't think it was it was tilted one way or the other. It was exactly the way they needed to be. Now, in this day and age, Metal Gear Solid 4 would likely be made a la, God of War Ragnarok, where it's a one-shot all the way through, and cutscenes blend very much into gameplay. I imagine that's how Death Stranding is. I just haven't played it yet, which is why I didn't mention another Kojima project in that comparison. But at the time, it was lovely. One of the first PlayStation 3 game I ever owned, and one of the best PlayStation 3 games I ever played. I wish it would come back. I know why it can't, but I wish that it would. So yeah, Metal Gear Solid 4, don't ever expect to see that again. coming up now on a third one. This is the one I was talking about in the previous, in the introduction, about a lack of source code. So this was an issue with Final Fantasy VIII. The source code was rumored to be messed up, but they were able to fix it and put it into Final Fantasy VIII Remastered, which came out in 2019. However, Panzer Dragoon Saga for the Sega Saturn, regarded as one of the best releases on Sega Saturn, period, is likely never going to come out again because that source code is gone, and it would require a potential developer to build the game from scratch. And at that point, you just make a new Panzer Dragoon. They did remake the original, I think in 2019, 2020, and that came out to middling fanfare. It was not the best port in the world, but it also wasn't the worst port in the world. It was a little bit janky, but it got the job done as far as I'm concerned. Saga will likely never see such a treatment just because of that lost source code. Like I said, if you're going to rebuild a game from scratch with new source code, you might as well just make a new Panzer Dragoon. If you want to call it Saga 2 or 3 or whatever the next game would be, or just call it Panzer Dragoon something else. That would be a better use of a studio's time, which just makes Panzer Dragoon Saga coming out again that much less likely. It sucks because Sega Saturn didn't have a lot of quality games to begin with. Panzer Dragoon Saga was definitely on top of the list for it to then fall into obscurity because source code was lost or whatever the reason is. I hope they find it, or they hope they find a way to re-release that game because it would really, really stink if it never showed up again. A fourth one, this one I thought, honestly, we were getting yesterday. I thought for sure that the new Tango Gameworks game that debuted at the Xbox Developer Direct on Wednesday, a game that ended up being Hi-Fi Rush, which looks good in its own regard. I haven't tried it yet. I thought it was going to be a new Sunset Overdrive. I really did. And that would have been awesome. For those that don't know, Sunset Overdrive came out for the Xbox in 2014, exclusively for the Xbox, developed by Insomniac Games, the folks behind now the Spider-Man franchise on PlayStation 4 and 5. Because Insomniac made Sunset Overdrive for Microsoft, that means Microsoft has sway over the first game. It was an exclusive after all. While buying Insomniac gives them the rights to the IP Sunset Overdrive, and if they ever wanted to make a new one, they could. That first game stays in limbo, which sucks. A re-release on PS4 and 5 would be cool. An updated version using the graphics package that Tango used, if possible, would be really cool. But there are too many hurdles, I think, in the way of that to make it happen. So we'll just have to hope that we can still download it on Xbox forever and it never goes away, or else it will be lost to the ether forever, because I don't think Sony would make a sequel either. They wouldn't want folks to go seek out the original game instead of playing stuff on their console. So I don't know that we'll ever see the Sunset Overdrive franchise again. Again, I thought we were going to see it yesterday during the Hi-Fi Rush stuff, but that ended up being pretty cool as well. So don't ever expect to see Sunset Overdrive, either the current one outside of Xbox or a brand new one, basically ever again, and that's a shame. And this last one is actually what made me think of this segment. It's a game that I personally hold very near and dear to my heart. So back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, musical rhythm games with instruments were all the rage. Guitar Hero and Rock Band were the top two, And in order to keep that rivalry going, they decided to bring in licensed real bands and make games centered around those bands. Guitar Hero had Aerosmith and Metallica and a couple of others that are eluding me at the moment, but those were the big two. And Rock Band decided they were going to go a different way. And in September of 2009, Beatles Rock Band emerged, a Rock Band game framed entirely around the most famous and recognizable rock group of all time. They recreated music videos, they recreated album art, they put hidden Easter eggs from the B-sides of their albums and hidden recordings and stuff like that. When it was loading a song, you would hear like actual studio banter that was found between the band. It was such a love letter to the band, a digital museum of Beatles music that was interactive. If you had a guitar controller, if you had a microphone, if you had the drum set, you could play. You could play and you could have a blast. But for multiple reasons, the lack of interest in the genre, the fact that the Beatles are notorious for IP-related stuff, I don't know that we'll ever see Rock Band in general, but Rock Band Beatles ever again. And the Rock Band Beatles DLC, it'll never become DLC either. It'd be one thing if the existing Rock Band game, which I guess is Rock Band 4, would add the Beatles stuff, but that's not going to happen either. It was a one and done, flash in the pan game, and it can't even gain a following now on like YouTube or Twitch or whatever, because it's all copyrighted music, and anybody who plays any of the Guitar Hero Rock Bands, honestly, but in this case Beatles Rock Band, anyone who goes and tries to play them on Twitch or on a live stream is going to get struck down with copyright, even though they're just doing what the game tells them to do. And that's a shame too. So not only is the game not coming back anymore, and the music will never be playable in the console or in the Rock Band arena anymore, but bringing awareness to the game through streaming is also impossible, because you're going to get docked as soon as you start playing. And that sucks. Right? I mean, it was a really good game. It was a really, really good game, and I wish it had hung around for a little while longer. I remember bringing it home, setting up a microphone, the guitars, and the drum set. My dad ran upstairs and got a mic stand for us because he's a huge Beatles fan. He's the reason I'm a Beatles fan. So he played it with us. He would drum on the drums. He would sing the songs. He kind of figured out the guitar after a while, but being a guy who played real guitar for the majority of his life, jumping into the controller was a bit difficult. And I respect that. I understand that. But I have a lot of fond memories and thoughts of Beatles Rock Band. And it's a shame that we'll never see anything like that ever again. And not only in the case of, a Rock Band music, Beatles music and Rock Band, I don't know that we'll ever see the Beatles in a video game at all ever again. That might have been a true one and done as far as the gaming industry is concerned for the Beatles. So there you go. There are 5 games that will likely never see the light of day again, thanks to multitude of reasons, be it IP discrepancies or lost source code, or the fact that it's copyright hell and there's more red tape and paperwork to navigate than is worth it. I hope that some of these someday do see the light of day again, but believe me, I'm not holding my breath for any of that. And let's not forget, this whole thing was spawned on by Goldeneye 007 coming out for Xbox and for the Switch. We'll see if that inspires other folks to maybe give their games a test as well. But ultimately, we shall see. We shall see. I can talk. I promise. I promise. And with that, we are at the end of episode number 123 of the Cheesesteaks and Controllers podcast, presented by Fox PHO The Gambler, 102.5 FM, 1480 AM, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcasts. I want to give a special shout out to Beacon, Beacn, a audio equipment company who were very kindly, this is not sponsored by the way, just very kindly sent me their brand new Beacon mic and Beacon Mix Create to try out in my podcasting. And if you hear the smoother transitions with the background music, if you start to hear sound effects as I'm talking like that, that is the Mix Create, which is something I'm very, very into. Big fan of the Mix. The four little volume knobs, and I can tinker around with it, and it allows me to insert stuff like that into here. So if I want to talk about something I'm not a big fan of, I can be like,
it stinks,
and get that Jay Sherman going. If I want to say something that I'm really excited about, I can go to M. Bison and be really excited about it. It's cool. It's cool. It's fun. If I want to select somebody in the NFL draft, I can do that too. Or if I'm just really happy about something and I want to laugh like Bray Wyatt, we can do that. And we can laugh like Bray Wyatt for a while. Now this particular sound effect is pretty long, and it's honestly a little creepy. So we'll take that. We'll turn it off. But I'm very fortunate to receive that email from Beacon, and very thankful that they reached out to me to test this stuff. If I sound better, it's because of the microphone. And if things sound smoother on the back end, it's because of the Beacon Mix Create. Again, not sponsored. They did not obligate me to say anything. They just sent over the samples, and I am impressed. I am liking what I'm seeing here so far, and I'm hoping that the podcast continues to benefit from it in the future. So go to Beacon, Beacn. It's like the word beacon, but without the O. And check out the equipment if you want to get some for yourself. I would highly recommend it so far. After about a month of use, I'll give a full review. But right now, so far so good, and I did want to shout them out for that. So, I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy the Royal Rumble. I hope you have an even better week right behind it, and we'll be back next week with more of the greatest in video games here on Cheesesteaks and Controllers. Goodbye, everybody.